Syria rolls out the red carpet for Iran's leaders as Washington urges Damascus to distance itself from Tehran. So have U.S. overtures failed to break the three-decade alliance between Syria and Iran? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Sami Zaidan. Syria's shaken politicians in the West by hosting a meeting between two of the Middle East's most controversial leaders, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, met in Damascus last week. Well, both Syria and Iran support Hezbollah. That's been cited as a major issue in negotiations with the United States. Well, in a joint news conference, the Iranian president accused the U.S. of trying to dominate the region. And Syria's President Bashar al-Assad went on to say that ties between Iran and Syria have never been closer. Well, in a further show of unity, the two countries signed an agreement cancelling travel visas between them. The agreement's been seen as a snub to the U.S., as Hillary Clinton said only last week that the U.S. would like Syria to begin to move away from the relationship with Iran, which is so deeply troubling to the region as well as to the United States. Well, since the Obama administration took over, the U.S. has been trying to develop its relationship with Syria. Recently, it had seemed to be warming. In February, President Obama nominated a diplomat for the post of U.S. ambassador in Damascus. If he's approved, he'll be the first American ambassador to Syria in 5 years. Well, just one day after the nomination, the Undersecretary of State, William Burns, visited Syria. It's been suggested his visit was aimed at loosening Syria's ties with Iran. Well, he said his discussions with President Assad had been candid and they reached some common ground that could be built on. Just after the visit, the State Department lifted a travel warning to its citizens regarding security in Syria. But the country remains on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Well, joining us today to discuss this issue further, from Damascus, Samir al-Taqi, Director of the Orient Center for International Studies. And Reem Allaf joins us from London. She's an Associate Fellow at Chatham House, specializing in Syria and Iran. And finally, Kenneth Katzman from the Congressional Research Service. He joins us from Washington, D.C. If I could start with you, Kenneth. Has the U.S. failed to prize away Syria from Iran?
Thank you very much. First, let me say I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the Congressional Research Service or reflecting any views thereof or Congress. I think it's the issue's not finished. There's been no deadline. So far, the U.S. diplomacy has not driven a strong wedge between Syria and Iran, but I think it's starting to, and I think that will take hold. In fact, I think this meeting between Ahmadinejad and Bashar al-Assad was in some way reflecting Iranian nervousness that the U.S. diplomacy might be working.
But how could it be working, Kenneth, when they're removing visa restrictions and hugging each other in Damascus?
Well, because this I think reflects Bashar Assad's, he wants to reassure Ahmadinejad that he's not rushing into the Western camp, and he's not, immediately jettisoning the relationship with Iran. But so I think in some ways the U.S. diplomacy stimulated this meeting and stimulated these steps. But, the fact of the matter is there's going to be a new ambassador. Bill Burns was received by Bashar al-Assad. So these are all steps indicating that Syria is open to the idea of a new relationship with the United States and all that goes with it, including, obviously negotiations with Israel on the outstanding issues that are unresolved.
Let's go to Damascus. Samir al-Taqi, do you agree with that assessment? Diplomacy, perhaps a long road, and this meeting between Bashar al-Assad and Ahmadinejad, maybe just a sign of nervousness?
No, I don't agree. In principle, I would say that this move had came mainly as a reply to the raising threats coming from Tel Aviv and the maneuvers of the Israeli army regarding that were creating scenarios that could target Damascus or Syria or Lebanon. So the tension mainly was raising between Syria and Israel from one side. On the other side, it was, I think, unfortunate that Mrs. Hillary Clinton intervened at this level to make this declaration asking Syria to distance itself from Iran. Since quite a long time, Syria had clarified that it's not the relation with the United States is not a substitute to its relation to Iran. Syria finds in Iran as an important ally, especially with the complete failure of the United States, unfortunately, to elaborate any concrete procedure, any concrete political process.
But
that would be
sorry, Samir, even if
peace.
it's not a substitute, is there, let me put the question this way, maybe the point that Kenneth was trying to make, is there anything that would make Damascus, any price at which Damascus would leave Iran?
If we speak about in an abstract fashion, no, there is no price, because Iran is a neighbor and we will build our relation with it on this basis. From the other side, I would indicate that the need for the military cooperation, the level of threat perception in the Syrian mind would be definitely changed in case there is a launching of a real perspective of a peace process. The failure of the United States to do so and the continuous threats that are coming from Israel, the Israeli side, threatening to occupy Damascus, to upheaval the Syrian regime, and it was really aggressive what was coming from Israel. This will widen the spectrum of alliance with Iran to include the military aspects and the defense cooperation.
All right, Reem,
so,
if I could move on to Reem Alaf from Chatham House. Do you read the situation? Let's say if some of those factors which Samir was talking about were to change, do you really think there is no price at which Syria would leave Iran, even if it were in return for the Golan Heights, as some suggest?
Well, I think Syria would be well advised to separate the two issues, as indeed should the Americans. I don't understand why we are, after 30 years of very close relations between Damascus and Tehran, putting the breaking of that relation as a condition to re-engagement from the United States. I think the big misconception comes from Washington, from trying to get Damascus to act a certain way without even offering anything in exchange, even if that were acceptable. We have to separate the two events. One is the renaming, the reposting of an ambassador in Damascus. All the punitive measures taken from Washington against Damascus have always been related to Lebanon and not to Iran. The Syria Accountability Act in 2003, passed, promoted by the Bush administration, was passed because of Syria's presence in Lebanon, and the withdrawal of the ambassador from Damascus was also made because of alleged Syrian involvement in the assassination of Rafiq Hariri. Both of these events were claimed by the United States as reasons to punish Syria and try to isolate it.
But at the same time, Reem, I mean, Hillary Clinton has been very vocal in saying that she wants Syria to move away from Iran. I mean, whether we'd like that to be separated or not, they do seem to be linked.
Well, the United States has to make up its mind as what it wants to happen in the Middle East. It also tells, Hillary Clinton was always also talking, as was Obama indeed, about what it'd like Israel to do, and the Israelis were very easily able to say that they refused to do something which in fact they had to do because of international law. There is very little logic in the way Washington is so, in quotation marks, engaging with Syria, when the only engagement is in the terms of demands and warnings about what it should do.
All right, I can see Kenneth Katzman shaking his head in disagreement, so I want to go to him. Illogical demands, do you agree with that Washington is making in its desire for new relations with Damascus?
Well, although I'm not here representing the U.S. government, as I said, I do work for the U.S. government, and I can tell you there is no condition. Syria's breaking away from Iran is not a condition of better relations with the United States. The United States policy is to engage Syria draw it into new discussions, you know, obviously over the outstanding issues in the Arab-Israeli question with Israel. And as a result, hopefully, presumably, Syria would break away from Iran, because Syria doesn't get anything from Iran. Iran has no money. You know, the investment is much smaller than some articles have said. Syria is not dependent on Iran. Syria gets really not much of anything from that relationship.
But perhaps,
obviously
Kenneth,
much
if
more
I
to be gained
allow me
from
to
a
interrupt
realignment.
again, but maybe the question Reem was putting
Sure.
is, what does Syria get from the US? Perhaps the track record there has been disappointing too.
Well, you know, obviously, you know, there are demands. Breaking away from Iran is not one of them, but obviously stopping support of terrorism is clearly, you know, obviously Hamas offices, Hezbollah, stopping, you know, shipments to Hezbollah, complying on, you know, UN resolutions, you know, to prevent weapons shipments into Lebanon. These are demands, yes, but breaking away from Iran is not a demand. It is a hoped-for outcome, which I think Bashar al-Assad, you know, he's a very, as his father was, is a very clever calculator of Syrian gains and losses, and I think he knows he has much more to gain from the United States than he does from Iran, from which he gets nothing at all.
Let's go to Samir al-Taqi. Has Damascus made the evaluation that the US is not able to deliver the Golan Heights at this point in time? Is that part of the reason why we're seeing a stronger move towards Iran?
Exactly. This is one of the main causes. I think that in principle the Syrians would think in such a way. Till now, what are getting from the United States is only a vision, is only hopes, is only there are no real approach. There are no real procedures.
All right. Sorry, Samir, I want to stop you there.
Unleash.
If I could get quickly a response from Kenneth Katzman to that. The United States unable, apparently, to deliver the Golan Heights. It's a bit of a disappointment for Damascus, isn't it?
Well, the Golan Heights was not delivered yet to Syria, that's correct, but the United States can certainly contribute. It almost succeeded, and from my recollection, in 2000, Syria almost got the Golan Heights back.
But
there were
some might point to the fact that the Obama
exact
administration put its neck on the line over the whole issue of stopping settlements, and that hasn't materialized either yet.
Well, you know, obviously that's true. Israel is a sovereign country, but, you know, I think the mistake is to say the U.S. Has no influence simply because they did not get Netanyahu to agree to all of what the U.S. wanted or the Arab world wanted in terms of settlements does not mean the U.S. lacks influence. You know, there are some theories that Israel wants to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, and the United States has very successfully so far prevented Israel from taking that step. So the United States still has tremendous influence, and if Syria really wants the Golan Heights back, the United States is certainly pivotal to that issue. Iran is not going to get the Golan Heights back for Syria. There's not a military option to get them back, but the diplomacy is an option.
All right,
to get that territory
let's
back.
go to Reem Alef once again. Can Washington, at the very least, with this sort of discourse that we're hearing right now from Kenneth, perhaps encourage some sort of engagement between Syria and Israel, and in that way put at least some strain on the relationship between Syria and Iran?
Well, since everybody's insisting on focusing on Iran as being the major factor that is making relations between the U.S. and Syria so strenuous, let us take that into consideration. There's very little to indicate that the Iranians are the ones who would be feeling slighted if the Syrians were in negotiations with the Americans or with the Israelis. I remind you that since 1991, the Syrians were engaged in the multinational peace process, which was launched in Madrid, and since then, for nearly 20 years, have been engaged in either direct bilateral talks with the Israelis or on track 2 negotiations or through a number of sponsors, lastly the Turks. Never has the relation with Iran suffered as a result of that. So I think it's very naive to imagine that the only reason the Syrians and the Iranians are together is because the Syrians didn't get the Golan Heights back. And you know, in any case, it's not a matter purely of American influence. I find it very strange that in one sentence we can talk about the Americans stopping the Israelis from illegally hitting Iran in anywhere in Iran, whatever the site might be, but are still talking as if they need to convince and cajole Israel into returning the Golan Heights. No country in the world accepts the occupation of the Golan Heights since 1967, so I don't think this should come really into the equation as to why Syria, 30 years down the road, is still allied with Iran, as are, I might add, a number of other countries like Turkey and like Qatar, which certainly do not have the same positions as Syria. Turkey is an ally of Israel. Turkey is a member of NATO, cannot be called a radical country, to use just American semantics, but Turkey is also a country that is growing closer to Iran because the regional politics have changed in such a way that alliances are yes.
You made your point there. Rima, I just want to recap. You made the point as well that there are other issues on the table when it comes to U.S. relationship with Syria. So let's recap a little bit. Of course, the U.S. sees the Middle East as a troubling region as a whole, and it would like a strong Arab influence on its side. In particular, it would like to harness Syrian influence to help restart the Middle East peace process. Relations between Israel and Arab countries soured further after Israel's war on Gaza over a year ago. Israel has suggested it could attack some of its neighbours if it feels threatened, and has made special reference, of course, to Iran. The United States has attempted to convince Syria to increase pressure on Iran to be more open about its nuclear program. And Washington has its own problems with Syria itself. Let's not forget, the US has accused the country of turning a blind eye to militants crossing its border into Iraq. I want to take up on some of those points. Go back to al-Taqi. What would a military strike on Iran do to Syrian relations with Iran and Syrian relations with Hezbollah in Lebanon?
First of all, I do not think that it's a real potential that we think about a military strike against Iran. At the contrary, I think maybe the Israelis would try to upheaval the table in the region. There are new trends. There is a new regional order which is being born now. If they want to do something, they would rather do something on the Lebanese, maybe Syrian front, and that's why I think they rose the temperature. Till now, the United States, I think, is not ready, and it's not only that the United States was preventing Israel from attacking Iran, it's about that Israel cannot by itself perform an efficient attack against Iran, because when you say A, you have to say Z with Iran. And Israel is not in any potential of saying Z with Iran. So strategically speaking, I think that it would be a major catastrophe for the region, and we have 4 overlapping and ripe crises in the region: the Arab-Israeli crisis, the situation in Lebanon, the situation in Iraq, and the Iranian nuclear file. Those 4 files are hugely overlapping, and they could have a domino effect, especially that every one of those crises is ripe in itself to explode. And the simple lack of mediation over each one of those crises had led in the past to an explosion. I will give you an example that the Arab League initiative, when it collapsed in Lebanon in May 2008, it needed only 4 days for Lebanon to explode. Then when the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel had ended, it needed only 3 days to explode, which means that each one of those crises is in itself really ripe and would explode immediately if there is no real international pressure and effort to mediate and to cool down and to push it toward a peaceful resolution.
All right.
And that's how I understand any potential attack on Iran. This will just inflame the whole region.
All right, let's talk to Kenneth Katzman, get the view from Washington. You know, Kenneth, a few years ago, or maybe more than a few now, there was talk in some circles in Washington about regime change in Damascus. Here we are today witnessing the U.S. reaching out to Damascus. Is it so unthinkable to think that maybe the U.S. and Iran could find an accommodation
Well, and you know, President Obama has that's the policy. That's what it was when he came into office. It's changed a little bit now because we've learned of new Iranian nuclear sites and you know, new Iranian nuclear work. We haven't even talked about the Green Movement, the opposition movement, which I think is really key to this picture because Ahmadinejad is a very isolated leader. He has no friends. The region knows he is viewed by his own people as an illegitimate leader who's got a tremendous opposition movement that wants to oust him from his presidency. So this is why I think he reaches to his few friends, such as Bashar al-Assad, who agreed to maybe give Ahmadinejad a boost by receiving him in Damascus. The Turkish officials obviously also, you know, they don't want bad relations with Iran, so they have reached out a little bit to Ahmadinejad. But the Gulf leaders, if you look at what they're doing, they are openly talking about giving more oil to China so that China will sanction Iran. They are openly receiving more U.S. Weaponry to contain Iran. Iran's leadership is highly discredited in the region. So, you know, Iran is reaching out to whatever friends it can find, and Bashar al-Assad is really the only friend Iran has. Nasrallah, of course, is a friend, but he's not the leader of Lebanon. He's the leader of a separate, you know, a group, a faction within Lebanon. So Iran is trying to, Venezuela, you know, Ahmadinejad's in trouble, so he reaches out to Hugo Chavez. This is what Iran is doing, you know, and it shows how little legitimacy Ahmadinejad has.
Reem, if the consensus sort of emerging on this show seems to be, on the one hand, from Damascus, that the US really hasn't delivered. You've made the point that it's normal for Syria to have relations with Iran anyway. The question is then, where is the relationship and engagement between Syria and the US going? Can it lead to anything?
Well, there is no engagement to speak of in the first place, because if we are only considering the return of an ambassador as engagement, I think this is really, you know, a very depressing reading of the region. The Obama administration
But Kenneth might make the point that it's the beginning of a process of some sort of engagement, is it not?
Exactly.
Not at all. Not at all.
Exactly.
Not at all. President Obama, not at all. On the contrary, President Obama has given very mixed signals to Syria. He has not attempted to change or to undo any of the damage done by the Bush administration. One example is just in the summer, the Syrians were told that there would be some waivers on the sanctions on Syria. And in December, President Obama personally blocked a deal that was supposed to happen between Airbus and the Syrian Airlines. So, you know, we're talking about civil aviation, we're talking about the suffering and, you know, the hardship of a lot of people, civilians. You know, Syrian Airlines is now down to just a few planes. So let's not, you know, pretend that the Obama administration has just turned over a new page from Bush and has changed everything. It has not. It has not really begun in an engagement, on an engagement road, and there is no need to start something new if you do not undo the damage done before. So perhaps the Americans should start considering Syria just as a country with its own interests in the region, and to remember that Syria's relation with Iran, if I may just add that, did not begin with Ahmadinejad. I mean, you know, American rhetoric about Iran did not change when Khatami was president. Khatami was considered a moderate within Iran and certainly outside of Iran. So, you know, we're always looking for somebody to blame. It's not just a problem of Ahmadinejad being hosted in Damascus.
I'm afraid we are running out of time, so let's thank our guests so much for joining this episode of Inside Story. Samir al-Taqi from Orient Center for International Studies, Reem Allaf from Chatham House, and Kenneth Katzman from the Congressional Research Service. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Feel free to email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For now, it's goodbye.